I was planning to do a video last week where I drew the two random numbers corresponding to the winners of my Nerds Per Minute book giveaway, and I was going to follow that up with my third episode of the Maladroit Millennial. I was recording this all throughout Saturday, and it would have been just barely after midnight on Sunday, and then I looked at my work and realized that I didn't have any audio the entire time. That was a really bad blow, and then there was another blow shortly thereafter when I was uploading my book to Amazon, and I noticed that I had the margins all wrong. I didn't leave enough gutter space, and when I fixed that and made a couple of other formatting changes, it changed all my page numbers around, so I have to go through the index all over again and redo it. I will be doing the index for the third different time. I am still catching a few errors in it. I'm going through about 2 pages of index a day, and I am still planning on launching the print book on September 27th, but I will get to the book release later. Anyway, I'm going to play this video that I had already recorded with no audio, and I'm going to extemporaneously add some audio to it. I went on random.org, which chooses true random numbers instead of pseudo-random numbers. And you enter the minimum number and maximum number, and since I was choosing from the first of 50 subscribers, I did 1 to 50. And I drew the number 43 and 47. So then I looked at my Typee Awards winners' comments, and they're in reverse chronological order. So this person, Pashkan, was the 50th. So then I went down 3 spaces, and Leon S. was number 47, and Arijan Jakshik was 43. So Leon and Arijan, you're the big winners. Congratulations. Now I'll need you to PM me somewhere your address for me to send the books to. You could either send it to my email address, which is sean.rona@gmail.com, or you could contact me on Discord, Sean number 6321. I will be selling on 2 platforms, Amazon and Smashwords. Here's my Amazon page for the book, Nerds Per Minute, A History of Competitive Typing. Here's the book cover, which you've seen. You haven't seen the spine and the back cover, but there they are. I'm going to be selling the Kindle edition, the ebook, for $9.99 on September 27th. September 27th is the launch date. I chose that for a couple reasons. One of them is that I have both Sunday and Monday off, and so doing it on a Monday makes good sense. Also, I've been thinking about doing a calendar, this day in typing history, selecting the most important typing related event for each day of the calendar year. And if you look at all the things on the September 20 days, the 23rd and the 27th were the only days that didn't have some sort of important events. That's a silly reason to do that, but that's one of the things I was also thinking of. I know that conventionally books are published on Tuesdays, so I'm trying to line up my paperback book, which will be $15. It's not ready yet because I still haven't finished the index yet. I have 6 pages of index to go through. I'm going to do 2 a day on the 24th, 25th, and 26th before hopefully releasing it on the 27th to synchronize with my ebook. Now, Amazon does not let you publish on KDP in advance, or unless it's an ebook. you can announce ebooks in advance, which I have done here, but you have to publish your print books on the spot. So and they can take 6 hours at least to maybe 3 days at most to actually appear on the site for a print book. So it might not, the print book might not be available on September 27th, but I'm going to try to finish my index on the 26th soon enough to submit it early on the 20 or late on the 26th. So hopefully it will come through on the 27th, so my releases will be synchronized. And you can see the details here. Publication date September 27th, 2021. Don't be dismayed by the print length. It says 933 pages. Yes, this is a longer than average nonfiction book. It's probably about 2 to 2.5 times a typical history book, but it probably isn't really any longer than a high school textbook. It's probably a little shorter than a high school textbook, in fact. This isn't that long. It's about 470 pages in the print form if you discount the bibliography and the index. And the bibliography is very long because I cite 800 sources in my book. I am not kidding. And you can also skim over the parts you're not interested in. Like, I had my mom read through my book, and she got very bored by the technical stuff. She liked the history stuff a lot, but she got bored by the QWERTY and Dvorak and the analysis of typing. And I didn't even show her the chapters where I calculated the fastest and slowest keys on the keyboard, the fastest and slowest words. I know that would be very boring to a lot of people. Probably not to the people who are following my channel, but I cover a lot of genres in this book. It's a history, it's an autobiography, it's a memoir, it's a technical guide on typing, although that's really only in 3 chapters, and it's also a bit of a social commentary. So I imagine a lot of you will like certain aspects of it and not like other aspects, and you can certainly skim through it. It is pretty long, but it's not as long as this implies, so don't freak out about that. And you can see here that I already appear on the bestsellers list very, very low. I put it under video and electronic games, history of engineering and technology, and general technology and reference. I have made one sale, and it was a few days ago, the 20th, and it was one of my high school classmates, who has been very supportive of me through this whole thing. He actually bought me a new computer that I haven't set up yet, and I was waiting until the book was finished before I set up this computer, and also gave me some better material to stream with if I want to do that as well, like a headset and stuff. At the moment, I have a lot of clutter in my house, and I don't want to show. And I don't want to show that, so that's why I'm not showing my face. But that's going to be one of my absolute biggest priorities after the publication is complete. I want to clear a lot of junk out of my house and move on to practical things. And I'd also, I need to learn how to eat better, and I'm going to talk about that later. And on my other platform, I was debating between Smashwords and Draft2 Digital. Those are two different platforms that will distribute your book to a lot of places that Amazon will not. Like if you want your book sold on Apple or Barnes and Noble or a lot of places like that, you go to either Smashwords or Draft2 Digital usually. Smashwords is the most popular of those such sites, but they have very strict formatting requirements that you must follow in order to have it be compatible to a bunch of different book formats. So I had to spend hours, actually an entire day almost, editing it out just for Smashwords. And I didn't want to do that, so that's why I wanted to do it on Draft 2 Digital. But Draft 2 Digital rejected my cover for some reason, and Smashwords didn't, so I went with them. That's the main reason I went with them. And on this page, you can see um, sample the first 20% of the book through EPUB if you want to just look at it before you buy it. I was a little late on getting this done, so that this is still being sold via a pre-release, but the book itself will not be available until October 1st on this platform. But I needed a platform other than Amazon because I know a lot of people do not want to do business with them, and I understand why. So that's the plan. September 27th for ebook for Amazon, October 1st for Smashwords and all the platforms they distribute to. I know Apple and Barnes and Noble are two of them. I don't remember who else. Um, and hopefully September 27th for the print copy of the book on Amazon. Smashwords doesn't do print copies. So if you want it in print, it has to be through Amazon, although I'll think about providing an alternative at some point. One of the things I did notice when I was doing the revisions for Smashwords for my formatting is that apparently you are not supposed to have tabbed paragraphs with lines in between them like Microsoft Word does by default. So I had to remove those for Smashwords, but I ended up not doing that for my print book because I was already working on the index before I signed up for Smashwords, and I didn't want to have to redo the index again by removing all those extra lines at the end of paragraphs, which apparently is considered really unprofessional. I really don't think my readers will notice, though. It's not like any of my readers are like typesetters or editors themselves, or I imagine very few are. I mean, I imagine most of you are teenagers who grew up making things on Microsoft Word with their defaults. So it'll just seem natural to you. Yeah, it's going to make the book more pages than it maybe should be, and I'm going to, I don't know, profit a few cents less off of it because of the greater page count, but I don't think people are really going to complain about that particular issue with the formatting. At this point, I just want this done. This is Sean Rona, and I'm the Maladroit Millennial. When I was growing up, there were only two generally recognized eating disorders, anorexia and bulimia. All those more recent ones like orthorexia, binge eating disorder, obesity being classified as an eating disorder, and so on are new. However, I am pretty much the poster boy for avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, or ARFID, one of these newer eating disorders which was not discovered or acknowledged until my adulthood. I don't have a formal diagnosis, but I know that I have it. People with ARFID tend to reject almost all foods and eat the same things day after day, usually 20 kinds of food or less. We tend to reject things with unusual texture, even at times entire food groups, and sometimes we'll only eat specific brands. While many people like to dismiss this as some degree of spoiled brattiness or a first world problem, it is an actual physical sensation and is linked to many developmental disorders. It's not really the same thing as picky eating because picky eaters can eat foods they don't like, they just choose not to. In my case, very often when I attempt to eat a food item I have never tried before, I usually gag so hard I am unable to swallow it. We usually also tend to avoid social engagements where any of the few foods we eat are not offered. For example, at Thanksgiving dinners at my grandparents', I ended up not sitting at the dinner table since I didn't eat any of the traditional Thanksgiving staples and usually just sat by myself at the bottom of their staircase completely alone. When I was in 6th grade, the entirety of one of my classes except me went on a field trip to Darien Lake in Rochester because they did not offer any of my safe foods. I stayed in school that day rather than going. On my last day of high school, we had a senior picnic and I blew it off and played hooky that day because I was pretty sure they weren't going to have anything that I could eat. That one illegal absence was one of my relatively few acts of childhood rebellion back then. At the Ultimate Typing Championship, I had to go to dinner with the owner of DOS Keyboard and Nate Bowen the night before, and while they were both sophisticated people who ate fancy meals, I ended up eating chicken fingers while there like the cultural 12-year-old I was and remain to this day. In my first year of life, I was a voracious eater, willing to eat any sort of food, healthy or not. I even once swallowed part of a musical instrument, and my parents had to call poison control. I was born in the Washington, D.C. suburbs in Virginia, but my parents were both from Syracuse and they moved back when I was 1. While looking for a place to live, they briefly stayed with my dad's father and stepmother. They took me to a Ponderosa restaurant, and out of the blue, my step-grandmother slapped me. I don't know if that was the trigger point, but my mom speculates that it was. Almost immediately after that, I stopped eating everything except baby formula, and I continued to almost entirely drink formula for about the next 3 years. I also wasn't potty trained until around age 4. I believe I was possibly the only person in history to learn touch typing before I was potty trained. I at least joke about that, but I honestly don't remember if it's true. However, I was not allowed to enter preschool until I was potty trained and taken off formula, so my parents found a few things I could eat. Few of them were healthy. Throughout my childhood, I ate the same diet repeatedly with almost no variations. For breakfast, I ate 2 slices of Freihofer's Canadian oat bread, a box of cherry juicy juice, sorry I couldn't find the cherry one, a picture of it, and a Flintstones vitamin. For lunch on school days, I ate 2 Pop-Tarts, a Keebler cracker and cheese pack, and a half pint of Burn Dairy chocolate milk. On weekdays I did not have school, I ate 6 Weaver chicken tenders. For dinner, I ate a Tony's microwavable sausage and pepperoni pizza. I missed the cue there. On weekends after my parents' divorce, I went to my father's and slightly switched it up, usually eating 4 slices of Pepperidge Farm cinnamon bread for breakfast, 6 slices of a medium Domino's pizza with extra cheese, sausage, and pepperoni on Saturday, and 4 to 6 more on Sunday, and half a box of mac and cheese for Saturday dinner, and 6 Burger King chicken tenders on Sunday. I also ate 2 one-pound boxes of Cheez-Its a week and drank 2 glasses of soda most days, although not very often. Once in a while I would eat pancakes, bacon, donuts, chips, saltines, and popcorn, and that was about it. Needless to say, I was not in shape. My weight basically doubled from 49 pounds at the start of 2nd grade to 96 pounds at the start of 6th grade. I was already on the borderline of being overweight in 3rd and 4th grade based on my weight, height, and age, but it wasn't that noticeable. I only had a little flab. But by 1995 it was starting to get more apparent, and in 1996 it was incredibly obvious and impossible to hide. At the start of my 6th grade year, I was closer to obese than normal weight. And according to this BMI by age chart, my BMI indicated that I was fatter than 91% of people my age. Since I was a nerd who never exercised and had 0 muscle tone, I was probably even fatter than that implies. I wore husky Robusto jeans, and they were tight enough that I wore them under my muffin top, and there was no way I could possibly get them over my stomach. When you're almost too fat for the fat boy pants, you have a problem. You can see the progression here. The first picture was from Christmas 1995 when I was mildly out of shape. The next picture is from my 11th grade birthday party 3 months later, and you can see how I gained a large amount of face fat. By summer, I went from having chubby cheeks to an entirely rounded face with no facial distinctions. By Halloween, I looked like I had eaten so much I was about to throw up, although I think that particular picture overstates it. This is a very inopportune time for me to get fat when you consider that in those days kids were bullied the most in their middle school years. I had also just transferred out of special ed classes and been mainstreamed into the classes with quote-unquote normal people. When I was in elementary school, I had been labeled multiply handicapped and placed in all the special ed classes that my school offered. Occupational therapy, physical therapy, adaptive physical education, so I didn't have to go to gym class with the normal kids. Resource speech because I had a speech impediment, and counseling. I was clearly autistic, but no one realized this because back then, in the wake of Rain Man, people believed that anyone who was high-functioning enough to not be institutionalized was not really autistic, because the Dustin Hoffman character in that movie was portrayed as high-functioning, even though he probably wouldn't be today. By the end of 5th grade, I had been mainstreamed out of all the special ed classes just in time to blimp out and get a lot less attractive at a time when the other kids were at their cruelest, and indeed that was probably the time I was picked on the most. Some people looking at this now may not think I was that fat at all, but this was largely before the obesity epidemic started. Unlike nowadays, most people were not constantly hooked up to their electronic devices, and most people did things in real life with other people rather than just sitting around the house by themselves. People used computers and played video games some, but there weren't many addicts. Really, it was only television that addicted people back then, so even most of the nerds were forced to go outside at least a little. So being sedentary and fat and out of shape was even less acceptable then than it is now, when basically all the nerdy robber barons who run anti-social media companies succeeded in taking revenge against the normies by addicting entire future generations to smart devices and basically turning the average person into what would have been considered an extreme nerd in the 90s. As a result, each future generation is more overweight, bespectacled, autistic, sedentary, having less sex, more generally and technically knowledgeable, but also more socially inept, neurotic, depressed, anxious, and self-loathing than the last. Every single nerd stereotype has massively increased over this time, which I guess explains why gaming is at least as popular, if not more popular, than conventional sports now, and why comic book, fantasy, sci-fi movies are the only blockbusters anymore. The good thing for me is that since the average Zoomer resembles me much more than the average millennial does, I think that's why people don't pick on me nearly as much on the Ultimate Typing Championship videos now that Zoomers dominate social media spaces than they did 10 years ago when millennials did. Millions of people who would have been normies 25 years ago are being turned into nerds. I probably would have been considered totally normal looking like that in 2020, but not so much in 1996. It certainly didn't help that at the same time I had started to wear large aviator glasses that stood out more, and I never took them off. I don't know if this is still the case, but in those days a lot of people were extremely conscious about not wanting to appear nerdy, so even if they regularly wore glasses, they always took them off when they had their pictures taken. That was usually not me. I wore glasses, damn it, and to pretend I didn't would be a lie to myself and others. I was always willing to show myself warts and all, rather than attempting to look like a cool person. I also most frequently wore this striped shirt, which made my corpulence even more obvious and harder to ignore. Needless to say, I was called a nerd a lot, and at a time when the word still had sting. I actually cried to my guidance counselor about this, and he tried to comfort me by telling me I wasn't a nerd, even though I was such a walking cliche that I might have been the nerdiest student in my school district's entire history to that point. I grew up in what could only be described as a nice suburban neighborhood slowly lapsing into decay. I lived in an apartment complex that looked nice on the surface but was becoming a slum. The landlord would rent to basically anyone, drug dealers, pimps, juvenile delinquents. I didn't have a problem with the drug users or sex workers. I did have a problem with the others. One of the residents in my building threatened to punch my mom's effing face in. I was definitely one of the trailer trashiest nerds of all time. Every day I walked to the apartment building across the street since that was where the bus stops, and back in 6th grade I boarded the bus with a girl across the street. We never talked to each other, but one day she randomly said to me out of the blue without warning, "I'm skinny and you're greasy." While I was clearly fat, that was still pretty cruel. My dad played a passive-aggressive routine with me where he wouldn't stop me stuffing my face with a pizza and a half a weekend, but frequently jiggled my belly saying, "What's this?" I think I remember turning away and hiding my gut every day we changed at gym class, but I was nowhere near skinny enough for that to escape notice. My parents were also going through a custody battle at the time, and maybe that triggered depression in me, which triggered my overeating. I know I said many times back then that 1995, the year before my fattest one, was the last year I was ever happy. I think I might still say that today, although the late 90s and early 2000s weren't too bad. Because I was fat, nobody thought I had an eating disorder, since anorexia was the eating disorder everybody first thought of, and I wasn't bulimic because I didn't make myself throw up. But a lot of people with ARFID do get fat. Because we struggle with eating unusual textures, that means we don't usually tend to eat much in the way of meat, vegetables, or fruits, and instead eat almost entirely carbs. Back in the 90s, people were brainwashed by things like the food pyramid and the 4 basic food groups into believing carbs were good or should even be the staple of one's diet. Notice how many more servings of carbs people were supposed to eat than anything else. Fat was being demonized while sugar was being increasingly used to substitute for it, and that apparently had to do with the sugar lobby buying nutritionists off. My doctor actually told me back in the late 80s or early 90s, despite how unusual my diet was, I was still getting all the nutrients I needed. I don't think anyone would say that today. My dad started taking me out more, so at least I'd be getting some exercise. He enrolled me in swimming lessons, had us ride a bicycle built for two, even though I never learned how to ride a bike by myself to this day. Designed tie-dye shirts, camped out at a NASCAR race at Watkins Glen International, and we walked an entire lap around the track and increasingly walked around his neighborhood. I still gained 8 pounds that year, and I was still fat, but a little less so because I was growing faster in height. My mom wasn't really worried because she expected me to lose my punch when I grew taller. I don't think that's actually true since it's calories in, calories out. Regardless, I was starting to get annoyed by the end of 1997, particularly when I noticed I couldn't see my feet when I laid straight down on the floor. In January of '98, I caught the flu for about a week. I had advanced to the district spelling bee and also had a math league meet scheduled at the same time in different schools. I had spent so long trying to decide which of those I was going to do, and I ended up being too sick to make either. I desperately wanted to go to class that day just to compete, but my mom overruled me. Clearly, I didn't have appropriate perspective about what was sensitive to other people, and it's weird that I cared so much more about pseudo-academic competitions than I did about my coursework, but I did. Maybe if I hadn't been overweight, I wouldn't have gotten sick, or I would have gotten less sick, and I would have been able to make it, but I don't know. At about that time, I abruptly stopped eating Cheez-Its and drinking soda for about 2 months, and I lost 15 pounds while I grew 2 inches taller, and suddenly I was scrawny for the rest of high school and college. Soon thereafter, I became renowned in high school for running in the halls between classes. Among my high school classmates, I was as well known for that as my arithmetic and typing abilities and never swearing. Because I had lost so much weight, one of my pairs of shorts that had worn out elastic fell off, exposing my underwear in the school hallway. I may have been thinner, but I was in no way cooler. However, I never actually fixed my diet. I lost my weight in the traditional nerd way by starving myself and still not exercising. But once I was thin, I continued to eat exactly as I did before, but simply didn't get fat again. Perhaps my metabolism had improved with the running or something. My diet remained essentially unchanged until my late 20s, but then I graduated into the Great Recession and never wound up finding a stable job. I worked at home, I never exercised, and seldom went anywhere. I started to lose my grip on reality. I became a NEET after quitting my work at home job for reasons I will explain later, and then I got fat again. At the time I got my master's degree at Cornell in 2008. The picture on the left, I was still very skinny, but by the time of the Ultimate Typing Championship less than 2 years later, I was clearly skinny fat, and you could see the face fat starting to pile up again. Although few people made fun of me for that reason, there were still a couple. If you're saying I have an uncommon body, then you are saying I'm fat, even if you say you're not fat shaming. And I couldn't look like a Discord mod. Discord didn't exist then. Anyway, having quit my job when unemployment was peaking in 2009, it makes sense in context. I fell into an even more depressed stupor that I have never really escaped from. Not that I was really happy before, and again gorged myself at the same time I was just getting into typing games. I had gone from a hot academic prospect to just a ne'er-do-well gamer in record time. But people thought I was fat at the UTC. I had gained almost another 20 pounds in a 9-month period by the summer of 2011, as my stomach had become the receptacle for 2 family-sized boxes of Cheez-Its a week, even bigger than the boxes I ate when I was a kid. I was basically right on the boundary of overweight for BMI, but because I had probably even less muscle tone than I did before, I was clearly fat, albeit not as much as in 1996. Additionally, I was now eating bigger frozen pizzas each day, eating a box of mac and cheese all by myself most weeks, and even eating lots of Zachary fruit candies. I had literally basically stopped caring about life. What's wild about this is that this was actually my most dominant period as a typist. 2011 was the year. I became the only typist ever to win the Intersteno Multilingual and Mother Tongue Championships in the same year, and it was the year I set my type racer record of 256 words per minute when I was at my fattest since my middle school years. There have been lots of people from Hortense Stolnitz and Albert Tangor in the old days to people like Viper now who believe that there is a significant athletic component to typing. There was even somebody on the Type Racer forum who wrote this. I find that I simply can't focus on and type the words as quickly when I have excess sugar. Perhaps this is the come down of the sugar high. When I eat healthily, I'm alert and agile. Don't push sugar in your gas tank and wonder why you're seizing up. This made me laugh my butt off considering how unathletic I was and had always been. I was never convinced there was any athletic component to typing, but I do acknowledge there may be a slight athletic component to top speed potential, since most of the people who set the very fastest burst speeds on Type Racer, like Terran, at least participated in some kind of sport. Having said that, the typist I consider the greatest in history, Cortez Peters Jr., was morbidly obese, so I think that athleticism plays no role whatsoever in typing. But for a while I was so depressed that only my typing and my auto racing statistics website were sustaining me at all. I started to face the reckoning for my lifestyle in 2013. Although I was no longer gaining weight, I was still hovering a few pounds shy of overweight when my small body frame probably should have weighed 20 to 30 pounds less than that. Around Thanksgiving, I started periodically about once a week, waking up unable to open my eyes. For a brief moment, I actually worried I was going blind. My eyes were somehow fused shut, although I figured out that when I tried to open them, I'd be able to see a peek out before they fused shut again, so it wasn't blindness. It usually took around a half hour after I woke up to fully recover, but sometimes it took longer. There was actually a day I went to a Scrabble tournament unable to keep my eyes open during the entire first game, but I somehow won it. As it turns out, I had a random sore on both sides of my nose where it appears that the temples of my glasses were actually digging holes into the nose, and pus from that wound was entering my eyes while I slept. I eventually switched from metal to even dorkier looking plastic glasses to remedy that. The wound healed and it never happened again. I was also starting to regularly have diarrhea and figured out I have irritable bowel syndrome. I was diagnosed for IBS and autism a few days apart in March 2014. I stopped eating Cheez-Its and mac and cheese entirely because I found out that annatto, the yellow dye used to color both of those, was apparently a major trigger for my IBS, and eating either of those gave me diarrhea every time, so I stopped and gradually slimmed down over the rest of the 2010s, but started being in more and more pain, especially around 2017 and 18. What freaked me out the most was that I was frequently having pain on the left side of my chest, specifically the rib that passes underneath my nipples. For months I was constantly worried I was having heart attacks, and I hardly told anyone. I even went to the emergency room one such day in 2018, and it wasn't cardiac. I believe it was either costochondritis or Tietze's syndrome. But I was constantly also having pains that shot up and down through my body all over the place, usually headaches, arm pain, and the aforementioned rib pain, but pretty much everywhere hurt except my hands. Clearly I built up like some sort of calluses or whatever from typing, so my hands were always okay, and typing was never doing anything to damage me. My bad posture might have been. I mean, that's the reason why you shouldn't adapt the posture that I do when I type, because that can cause you pain. I stopped eating very much for a while and lost a lot of weight quickly. I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, but I'm not sure I believe that one because I don't know if I have as many pains as often as you are supposed to have for that. And there are times I'm not really in pain, but I haven't really felt well in a long time, and I know I won't until I actually learn how to eat real food. What's amazing is I kept dominating on typing sites for the second half of the 2010s, even when I felt too sick to walk sometimes. That is not to say I haven't been trying. Several years ago I did start regularly eating a banana a day, sometimes two, so I'm not eating only carbs. I ate peach and pear packs fairly often for a while. I ate strawberries every week or every other week for a while. I ate applesauce periodically, usually unsweetened. I started looking into meal replacements. I first tried meal squares because I initially felt I would rather eat than drink a meal replacement, but they gave me some of the worst diarrhea of my life because of the xylitol in them, so even though I liked the taste, I knew that wouldn't work. Then I started drinking a Soylent bottle most work days and some days when I don't have work. As much as I find the tech bro mindset they cater to, and the fact that they name themselves after a food item from a horror movie rather grotesque, I do think it's helping me some, and I'm not doing as bad as I was 3 or 4 years ago, but there are still days I'm in great pain, and I hardly have anything I consider a normal bowel movement anymore. While I still eat pizza every day, I've now started making my own, which is probably marginally better than the frozen pizzas I ate before. I started eating more oatmeal and less bread, which is also somewhat better. I started eating nuts, usually almonds, but occasionally cashews and peanuts. Considering how little I ate in my childhood, I'm definitely trying. I even got down some canned carrots once and only once, but then never tried again. I'm always yo-yoing through various degrees of skinny fat, but now that the population in general is much fatter than it was, I'm probably average in that regard. Autistic people tend to be very ritualistic in nature and resistant to change. We do the same things often in the same order every day. When an autist develops a diet, good or bad, he or she is likely to continue to eat the same things over and over. Not all autistic people have ARFID, but they are very highly correlated. This disorder did not exist when I was a kid, and neither did autism for people who weren't institutionalized, but I'm glad they do now. I was the kind of person who used to scream at my parents when they put me to bed later than my 7 o'clock bedtime. Picture somebody getting mad because they weren't allowed to stay up. About the only healthy things I was doing at the time were not drinking, smoking, or doing drugs and getting enough sleep. I was mostly a very straight-edge guy apart from my diet. Indeed, I bought into the 90s anti-drug propaganda to such a degree that I was so proud I was not a drug user, while not realizing I was doing way more damage to my body via my nutritional atrocities than the average drug user does. I wore these Dare shirts all the time. This is from the 1997 district spelling bee when I was in 6th grade. I was slightly less fat than 96, I guess. And I went out in the first round. I misspelled tapestry. My parents didn't study that because my mom edited a Mensa magazine called The Unicorn Tapestry, and my dad assumed I'd know it because of the Carole King album, but I mean, I don't think I'd even heard of Carole King then. I still don't do any substances except occasionally taking Tylenol, but I lost my sleep habits in college and now I sleep whenever, usually staying up until 1 or 2 a.m. even if I have to be at work by 7:30 or 8:30, and often 3 a.m. or later on days before I have to work. Now that the book is finished and will hopefully be released on the 27th, I need to start figuring out things I can eat that have some kind of texture that won't make me gag so I can try to nurse myself back to health. I probably want to do that more than I want to work on projects, and then I'm probably going to end up working on projects because I know me. Do any of you have ideas for simple, bland foods I might like that might help? And I need to stop scrolling places like Reddit for hours just to read people debating political issues without even participating in the debates. I really want to be more productive in general and start taking my real life more seriously. I also know I probably never will. This episode is not brought to you by avocado toast. I wouldn't know an avocado if I ran into one on the street. Thank you and good night.